it kind of helps you establish what kind of community are you in. If you can't ask the question, that can tell you a lot about the culture, where you've moved, who you're with, and how you'll plug in to add something. The tolerance of questions. That's why I love this series that you have. The tolerance of questions can tell you a whole lot about what you can contribute and what that culture will do to embrace you or accept you or nurture you.
This is a podcast called Walk, Talk, Listen. An attempt to connect people and make this world a bit better by sharing opinions and experiences based on the belief that everyone's perspective is true, albeit partial. My name is Maurice Blom, and I would like to welcome you to yet another episode of Walk, Talk, Listen. Well, good day, everybody. This is another episode of the podcast Walk, Talk, Listen. And as always, I'm delighted with today's guest who will introduce herself. Sabrina, please go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Sabrina Matthews, and I am a director at FSG. And I live in Macon, Georgia. So that's the heart of Georgia, middle Georgia. And I'm actually someone who actually moved back to where I grew up. I grew up in Macon, Georgia,
Oh, okay.
was away for almost 25 years, almost 30 years, and moved back to help with some families dynamics and situations. But yeah, I'm joining you from Macon. And I really appreciate the chance to talk to you a little bit more about myself and some of the things that have motivated my journey. Um, yeah.
And I'm really looking forward to listening to you. And we have been connected by Nikhil, a mutual friend. And for the listeners who, if you did not listen to that episode, please check it out.
Yeah.
Because I really think he's an awesome guy as well, and he had lots of good stuff to share. Sabrina, so you were born and raised in Georgia. Tell us about that, and
Yeah.
how was that? And was it a rural, an urban environment? A lot of
Yeah.
siblings around? Yeah.
Yeah, good question. And thanks for mentioning Nikhil. He and I have a bit in common. We both worked at the same employer in the past at different
Okay.
times.
Uh-huh.
We now work at FSG together right now, but we also have parents that moved into the South, that moved into the states where they grew us up and maybe didn't have that full family network. So
Mm.
I grew up in Macon, Georgia. My parents eloped when they were in college in South Carolina. And after they eloped, after being drafted in the war for my dad, they moved to Macon, Georgia. They moved to Macon, Georgia after they got their degree. And I am the middle child. I have an older sister who's 3 years older than me. I have a younger brother who's 7 years younger. But living in Macon, Georgia, where we didn't have family close by, I think it was really interesting to grow up in a place where my parents created community through friends. There were no family members. They were within driving distance of South Carolina, but I think they found community through a number of the things that they participated in, volunteered with, their work. And yeah, and so as a middle child, I grew up behind an older sister who was extremely accomplished. She's still one of the smartest people I know. And I had a speech impediment. I had a speech impediment. I was nonverbal for quite some time. And so a lot of kind of those first couple years, I really relied heavily on my sister to speak for me. But growing up in middle Georgia, I don't think it's what people would expect of the South. I think where I live and where I live today, it's this nice little island of diversity. It sits between a lot of rural communities with a lot of farmers, but it's a small city. It's a small city about 80 miles south of Atlanta. So you don't have the big movement of a large city. And Atlanta's pretty busy. It's very international. I think it's got a lot of different communities that are segmented apart. But Macon actually is a true like melting pot. You have a lot of what is termed Southern pride, but you also have a lot of folks that, within like a 20-minute drive, there's a huge Air Force base. So you have a lot of folks that have lived in a lot of different places there. You have people who have grown up here for decades. And I think something about the way my parents moved here and really tried to connect to their coworkers and the neighborhood they lived in and the city, kind of working on different city councils, working in the school system, working within political campaigns. I got a chance to get exposed to a lot of different people. But it was interesting. I think I'm a leader today, but I was not even trying to be a leader before. I have always been a child, I think this has kind of affected my career, who asks questions to those that I trust and just like think like there's always a question behind motivations. There's always an assumption that you should be able to dig out and dig and explore more. And luckily I grew up in a church as a Christian. I'm a Christian today. I grew up in a church that allowed for that. A lot of education in that church, a lot of families, and my parents got a lot of questions from me. Um, I think the interesting thing with growing up behind a very accomplished older sister, just, 3 years older, I was really focused on not having any assumptions about who I was based on who my parents were. They're really well connected, very, very communicative with all their circles, and I struggle with that at an early age. I've caught up now. But also with a sister who was really, really well accomplished, academically, smart. I struggled with a couple of those things, and so in growing up, I was a little bit of a rebellion, of a rebel. When I would have the teachers that my older sister had, I would let them know very quickly, I am not her. Lower the expectations, and I think what was really nice is that my parents allowed me to be me. There was no pressure from them to fit a certain mold, but I did, I think over time, my mom is a speech and language pathologist, so that did eventually help me with some of my speech issues, and help me to kinda, I think, blossom a bit. But I was kinda slow to taking on leadership roles and but I was always involved with my community just kind of based on what my parents did, and it just seemed like Macon was a great place to pick up civic responsibility. And so I mentioned those things because the consistency of asking questions, just feeling like every question can be asked and listen for the answers, listen for what is not said as an answer, but also the responsibility I think of having civic involvement, getting involved with your community in whatever way you can. You don't have to be a leader to be really tapped into your civic responsibilities. And then having a community for my family, it was the church, it was a number of like friends that folks worked with. So that model to me, like community is critically important. What you give back to it is critically important. And you should always be able to ask the question. And sometimes what I found as I've grown up is asking the question, Maurice, it kind of helps you establish what kind of community are you in. If you can't ask the question, that can tell you a lot about the culture, where you've moved, who you're with, and how you'll plug in to add something. The tolerance of questions. That's why I love this series that you have. The tolerance of questions can tell you a whole lot about what you can contribute and what that culture will do to embrace you or accept you or nurture you.
It took a while before you went into leadership, and that's something that's very important what you do now, right?
Yeah.
Around leadership and helping, coaching people. Um, so I have maybe two questions or one observation. And one is, when did it then, if you think back, when did the leadership, abilities then kick in?
Hmm.
Was there a moment, or did it
Hmm.
go gradually? Having said that, though, and that's maybe my observation, is if you are going to school and come in 3 years later than your sister, and you
Hmm.
tell the teachers already that you're not like your sister, is
Hmm.
that not kind of showing some leadership there, taking control of a situation?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I do think there's a certain stubbornness to being a leader and being a leader requires people to really title you as that. You have to have some followership to really claim that. And so in not every room do I need to be a leader or am I equipped to be a leader, but I do think I did not want to be assumed to be anyone else besides who I was. I love my sister to death. I've always admired her, probably to her detriment because I was an annoying little sister. But I never wanted to be confused as her. or anyone else. I think it was just really important for me to have my own identity. I do think though, pushing back on people's expectations or not, disrupting just I don't know, established thought or community thought, when the disruption actually helps clarify the truth about it, I think that's important. I think that's important, and I don't think I pursued leadership in any role, but I was involved with like my student government when I went to college. I was involved with kind of leadership roles in high school, captain of track, band lead, drum major, leader in a jazz band. I definitely stepped into those, but a lot of times it was just more of me having asked all those questions and like, oh, I've got a better idea. What do I need to do to kind of get this out there or at least get it tested by the group? And what that does require sometimes, if you think that you know better or you can contribute to where we're headed, you got to speak up. Like, I think that's a part of that civic example that my parents showed. And it wasn't like huge, on a stage being political leaders, but just more of there's a city council meeting, go to it, say what you need to say. There is, we were really involved with scouting, Girl Scouts for me, Boy Scouts for my brother. There is something that needs to be pursued, say it. And so I think having a family where you ask the questions, you should pursue the answer, even a non-answer is an answer. But you should kind of put your point of view out there. You should assert a point of view and have a point of view. And sometimes that does require leadership. Yeah, so I definitely think that does. Um, as I've matured, I think I've figured out how to target it in more effective ways. Definitely learned that a lot in undergrad, but yeah, asking questions and maybe confirming that no one was going to make assumptions about me, nor do I want assumptions made about others. I want clarity. If it can be pursued, sometimes things are nuanced, but if it can be pursued, I assume it informs next steps a lot better. It informs, keeps you from leaning into biases or shortcuts. I had a lot of assumptions put on me about, who my sister was. As I said, my mom was a speech and language pathologist. I had a speech impediment. So I had so many assumptions on me growing up that I did figure out real quick those assumptions are not going to be good if I don't set the truth really quickly of what to expect of me. I'm Sabrina. I am not, Mrs. Matthews, my mom. I'm not Nisi, my sister. I'm Sabrina. And my parents celebrated the difference. And I think all of us, me and my siblings, I have two, we're all very different. I think my parents, I think they were just awesome. I mean, a lot of people can say they think their parents are awesome. My parents, they allowed us to do so much, explore so much. They were conservative on a lot of things that we could not do, but they were very good at communicating with us and just, "What do you think, Sabrina?" And just having little play dates with my dad, just me, outings with my mom, just me, and just talking about, an 8-year-old's day. So I say all that to say I think I stepped into the types of roles I'm in now, where I may influence leaders and hopefully more inclusive leaders. I try to be one. A lot of that just comes from, I think, some things that were honed when I was younger of no assumptions. Like if you can get clarity, why not? Ask the question and get involved. Like find out how you can contribute.
Can you tell us something about, your undergrad and then ultimately because you studied and
Mm,
why did it
mhm.
happen?
Good question. When I you may pick up that I don't lean on nuance. Like I want to know the details. I want to know the facts.
Hmm.
And so when I went to college, the school I ended up going to was the school my parents met and eloped at. I was not going to go to that school. I was going to go to school with my sister. So I ended up going to South Carolina State University in
Sure.
Orangeburg, South Carolina. That's a very rural town where my mom grew up. My dad was from Charleston, South Carolina, which is about 90 miles, I think, east there. I went there saying, I'm going to, major in accounting, which I did. And that was only a slight pivot of what I had decided I was going to pursue when I was a freshman in high school. So I kind of was like, I'm going to do these things. And so accounting was, I think, a good path for me to have my own. I think at the time, like I wanted to have my own salons and barbershops, and I wanted to be able to handle the money. That didn't quite, people go to school for a lot of things and don't ever really work in them. But I did work in a lot of risk analysis, and I worked in the financial industry for quite some time, coming out of South Carolina State University. But the nice thing, that is a HBCU, a historically Black college and university, and I ended up going to a different private school for my MBA, but going to an HBCU was really nice because I think it was the only time that I was not a minority. And that did so much for me being able to again kind of be me. No one here needs to explain the minority experience here. No one needs to explain what it is to be Black in America. We're all that for the most part. There were a number of international students. It's a good mix of Latina students there in Orangeburg, but that allowed me to just kind of pursue now who am I? And to stand in spaces where my diversity was linked to a lot of other things that weren't visible. Some things like my faith as a Christian, wanting to get involved civically in student government. That was just an amazing experience. I have actually some of the best friends of my life, my mentor. They all came from, at least a lot of them came from that experience at South Carolina State University. And when I left that environment, I moved to New Hampshire, which is predominantly not does not have a large minority population, and it was funny when I made that decision, some of my friends were like the I had a job offer in Charlotte, North Carolina, in Atlanta, Georgia, and that was where more people went. And a lot of my friends were saying, "Oh, you're just," one of my friends particularly said, "You're just doing that because you can." And I was like, "Yeah, why not? Like I got an offer to go to New Hampshire. It'll be nice to kind of test myself because I can always come back home. And I know that's a privilege to be able to say I can move away and I can come back home, because I have that option, but I'm gonna test myself. I'm gonna test myself in a whole new environment, again, where I can be me and, start to see what I learned, see how it's applied in the workplace, and so I started working in the financial industry with that move and, was there for about 2 years in New Hampshire, and then moved back down into Georgia, in Atlanta, Georgia, but was working to support both Boston, New England, and Seattle. So kind of like a split role. Um, but over that time, I think the thing that I started to pursue more than anything, Maurice, I talked a little bit about, wanting to ask those questions and to make sure that there was involvement. But I think I started to see that there's a lot of talent that can be wasted. And sometimes that is wasted by manufactured barriers, by an inability to just try new things. It's like jump into a whole new experience. And so a lot of my career from starting at Liberty Mutual in New Hampshire, moving down to Georgia, still working with them, I stayed with them for 13 years. A lot of what ended up becoming my current career was, and my volunteer work was opportunity should not be wasted and skills should not be wasted, but sometimes you have to do some things to get the two to meet. And it's interesting because even in physical spaces, I do not like any waste. I like, okay, let's make the most optimal outcome of these two things coming together. Let's not have any assumptions. Let's figure out how we're going to use these resources, how we're going to use the skill set, how we're going to use this opportunity. And so I think when I started working in my field of analysis and finances, I started working on some training that would move us into more price sophistication. And that was a situation where it was just like, people aren't getting to the best performance because they don't know how to do this. Let me step in, let me help. And it became a path into more of technical training in HR, moving from more of an analytical actuarial department. But the driver behind that was people aren't performing because they just don't know and they need someone to explain. And what a waste if they could get it, but there's no one making it accessible for them. And so training started to become the next path of my career. And it was particularly around like organizational development, sometimes the learning strategy around and merger and acquisition. I started doing that work with Liberty Mutual. But in there, I also started doing a little bit more around like how do you bring people into opportunities and is the pipeline actually expansive enough? And so um, I see that more as there's always there's always a set of skills that people are born with. I feel like everyone is born with a certain level of talent, but if they don't have the opportunity, if it's not within their wheelhouse to actually, have access to certain paths and opportunities, and they may not be all the best that they can be. And I know that from my growing up in Macon, Georgia, there were a lot of opportunities that were presented because my parents were so committed to making sure that I could be myself, but still have opportunities to be heard, to, speak well, to get plugged into the community that I think that that just created a connection over my career of just how can I work to bring opportunity to people who are skilled and ready to move forward.
When I'm listening to you, what I find interesting is that, really from very young, you try to figure out your own path. And it seems then, when you were following your path, and if you see that other people are struggling with that, you want to assist them.
Yes. Yes.
And so that's interesting. And then your own ability to find your own path, you bring back to your parents because of the opportunities, the situation they created. So that always rings a bell with me in terms of, okay, what about the other two siblings?
Hmm.
How did they, develop?
Yeah.
Can you
Yeah.
tell a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's so funny. Right now I'm planning this thing that we do every year called
Mhm.
Simplication. It is a trip that my siblings, my brother and sister take, no partners, no children, just a trip for the siblings. And it's interesting, Maurice, because the role they played growing up is very different than what it is now as adult children of aging parents, a father who's passed away. But in growing up, my sister was, we called her junior mother. She was like mom junior. She was gonna lay down the law, whatever mom and dad said, she was gonna reinforce it. And if you didn't do it, she was gonna tell. So that was her role solidly for quite some time. And I looked up to her so much. I was annoying though. Like I would go into her room when she would leave from school. She was very patient with me, but she also helped me see where, just she helped me see myself in some of my passion to emulate her was just maybe not the best way to follow along. Now, my brother, on the other hand, he was 7 years behind me. He was definitely the baby of the family. And it's so funny. I don't think I ever had a role of authority with him. We were always friends. And even when I tried to exert my big sister authority, he was having none of it, which is quite interesting. As I got older, as he got into high school, I was leaving college at the time. He I started to, I think, provide a little bit more of that authority and advice and motivation for him. He was in the military. And I actually remember when he was in high school, he was going for the Eagle Scout Award for Boy Scouts. And I remember he was not focused. And I was like, this is not about you. This is about, the family, the legacy. You're going to get this award. You're going to focus hard. So I think he helped me hone my, I guess, my motivational chops. He was having none of it. We were growing up in the same house, but as I moved away, and he says I'm a role model, even though I've gotten some of the best advice from him over the last decades. But they helped, and I think siblings do this. They help just kind of they give you a mirror and a way to calibrate how you show up. And I think I have some really, really close, good friends, but I think I can be a good friend to those friends I have outside of my family because I had these siblings, because the communication was free flowing. The evaluation of how you're showing up, how you're helping out with house chores, how you're interacting, maybe getting on nerves, like it builds a resilience just to have a sibling. And it's funny because I see my godchildren, and I do not have children myself, but I see my godchildren and my niece, and a lot of them are what two of them are only children, and I do see the different social development that they have to experience maybe through the activities they get involved in or school. But for my sister and brother, they're just a source of help. They're a source of really ensuring that there's still good play. As an adult, you still have to play. Like that's an investment of self to play. And when we do our simplification, we'll play the old board games. Like we have these silly competitions, but then we talk about very serious stuff about our family, certain decisions about our health. But yeah, my siblings have had different roles and different contributions to my decisions in my life as we evolve in our relationship. I think at the state we are now, it is exactly what it needs to be for the kinds of decisions that we're balancing now. It was totally different though, growing up as, teenagers, young adults, college. But it's always been supportive. And my parents were really big at noting like your siblings are who you have. when we're gone. Like that is an important relationship. And they modeled that. My mom is an oldest daughter in her family of six. My dad was a baby brother in his family of, I think, of eight and by many years. And so they were always the glue for their families. And we saw that. And yeah, I think I have some of the best siblings that someone could have, but they're very different. We're all three of us are very different. And what we've been for each other has changed quite a lot in all good ways in the last 20, 30 years.
And can you tell us a bit about what the sibling thing is about, that nobody
Yeah.
else can go?
So look,
And how often do you do that?
yeah, I recommend this tremendously.
Mm.
And there's a lot of research that I think has come out at the New York Times and there is Freakonomics have talked about the relationship you have with your siblings can be one of the least studied, one of the most critical relationships that you have. But at when we were when both my parents were getting ready to celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary, now I said they eloped and they had not had like they had a wedding that was for their parents. It was supposed to be the real wedding. They had already been married for like a couple years. So we decided for their 50th anniversary, we're going to do a very big gala. It's going to be like a major wedding. And so this was what the siblings were doing. My parents knew about it, but they had to kind of keep arm's length at the plans. And at that point, to get some of the planning done, we did 2 trips that year before to get our plans together to make sure like where we had costs and stuff. And we said, let's keep doing this. Like, let's keep. So once a year, one of us will host close to our hometown or in our hometown. And the goal is just, and it's the third weekend of every October and we get together. Even if it's in the hometown, we may do a little hello with the partners, but it's just us. We leave, we may rent an apartment, rent somewhere, and we will each maybe name something that we want to do. We may name a discussion we need to have about family activities, but we are also going to do like hiking. We're going to do some walking, which is a very good spiritual meditation. We're in different places with our spirituality and faith. So we'll do that kind of stuff. We'll play games, like, there's, like, a running competition of Monopoly, and I'm down, I'm not winning right now, my brother is, but just having that kinda banter where you can play, and it was interesting, we had a conversation 2 Siblications ago where one of my siblings were like, can I bring my partner?" And I said, let's talk about it at the first night meeting, dinner. And we don't make it too formal. Let's talk about it. And we said no, because who you have to show up as a partner and who you have to show up as a parent is different than who you have to show up as a sibling. And there's some things we'll discuss, could be about our parents and their care that require a lot of context to be inclusive to a partner. Someone who hasn't seen you from, Pampers up. And so we said, no, no, we will never have parents. And as far as like right now, we'll never have partners there. We'll never have children there because we need time for this role of being siblings, being anchors of our family and our legacy. But let's make sure we plan a number of good family vacations where everyone is there and we agreed. But I'm telling you, this has been one of the most nutritious things that psychologically we have done. I love it. And I'm hosting this year in Macon, Georgia. So it's going to be interesting to bring everyone back to our hometown where we don't live. We live like within 5 to 13 hours of each other's in terms of a drive. And so we don't see each other all the time. But this year I'm hosting.
Wow, that's so cool. And you doing it in October, maybe the walk that you do is part of the 100-mile campaign.
Yeah.
The three of
Oh,
you,
I love
so
it. Yes, yes,
you
yes,
can
yes.
contribute to this year's campaign. Um, Sabrina, um, I would like to go slowly through the work that you're doing now,
Okay.
and is that linked with your move back to Georgia as well?
Yeah. Not quite.
Okay.
But it is linked to a set of 3 questions I've asked throughout my whole career
Mm-hmm.
and have guided me, I think, in the right path. Is it okay if I share those 3
Yeah.
questions?
Yes.
Okay. So the 3 questions that I've asked, and I got these from my mentor in undergrad. He didn't know he was my mentor at the time. But the first question is, what are the issues I want to work on in the world? Um, I feel everyone has a contribution to make, literally everyone. What are my issues where I can contribute? The second question is, who are the people I want to be working on those issues with? Um, If I don't know their names, like what are they like? What can they teach me? What can I teach them? What can we create together that will be unique and special? And then also as I've worked, I've figured out who I don't want to work with on those issues, like who might deplete me, who might get me distracted from the coercive impact I think that I can make for those issues. The third question though is what room am I in with those people as I work on those issues and how am I showing up in that room? And this is something where I really try to visualize this. I do vision board parties every beginning of the year and I really try to think about what room am I in? And when you think about that, I feel like you can see yourself, at a lectern speaking. You can see yourself giving a presentation, but I like to see myself, I'm side by side with whoever I'm talking to. We're side by side. We're penciling stuff in. We may be at the whiteboard together. The way I've answered the question of the issues, that hasn't changed very much in the last 2 decades. The people I want to work is that's expanded. I've kind of honed in on, ooh, I can show up a little bit stronger with these folks in the room. And I even have gotten a little bit clearer on the people who I don't want to work with. And no knock to them. It's just there's certain chemistry you can get from a collaborative environment. But then the rooms have changed a lot as I've grown, as I've gotten to more leadership roles, the rooms and the role that I'm playing. And I find that more of my role is to activate maybe the person who's speaking. It doesn't have to be me. More of my role is doing the partnership piece where if I'm trying to influence scalable change, that requires some side by sides. It doesn't require as much sitting across the table from someone. I want to be side by side. We're drafting something together. So those three questions have led me to where I am now, working in corporate workplace transformation. One of my clients is a large foundation that funds a program that people can join to really get skills, frameworks, and best practices to activate workplace equity. And before then, I worked in corporate. I worked for the U.S. Treasury Department for a while, but for the most part, I worked in the private corporate space for quite some time. And I was leading at a private consulting firm. It's global, big footprint. I was in charge of their inclusion belonging strategy, previously called DEI. But I was asked to actually come back. I had been leading their leadership development globally, and a number of the both Americas and Europe and East Asia learning there. I left, but I always did my volunteer work. I did mission work, and the company knew about it. And so when they were trying to develop a DEI strategy, they said, "Hey, would you want to come back?" And that coming back led me the flexibility to come to Macon. Going back to that company, it was a company that Nikhil and I both worked at. But I was invited to come back to help stand up that strategy. And it was global, which was really, really good because sometimes when you think about these terms of equity and inclusion and belonging, it really is a detriment to think of it from the lens of one market and one country. Um, the words that we use in America don't even make sense in other places. And so setting up that strategy was really important. It answered the three questions I asked about the issues, the people, the rooms. Um, but it also gave me flexibility at that time to come home where my dad was very sick. And I wanted to make sure I was there to help my mom, just manage the stress. And just me and my dad were extremely close. So just having that time to come back, having the flexibility to come back, that led me to the job that qualified me for my current job, if that makes sense. So leading that effort at that private consulting firm for 5 years, the roadmap that was created was a 5 year roadmap, a 3 to 5 year roadmap. And I thought, this is this is good, but I think after 4 or 5 years, it may need a successor. Like, I do think there's a point where you need to move on because it's time for someone else to step in, fresher ideas, different activations. And so when I came back to Macon under that prior employer, I thought this is like 3 to 5 years. And then the current job I have, it popped up right on time and it answered the three questions at the level I was at to, oh, okay, I do want to, this is my first nonprofit role, but it's consulting still, which is very familiar to me. But it allows me to really work with people who are maybe struggling with things I was struggling with in leading that inclusion and belonging strategy effort and to kind of take what I've learned and maybe bring it to scale with a really great partner, with a really great team at FSG. FSG's done a lot of work in this space, so it allows me to continue to learn. It allows me to bring in what I've learned and seen and to really target it towards there's other folks trying to do what I'm doing and they may show up differently, they may approach it differently. we can now work together and I can help activate that in a broader sense in multiple organizations.
Cool. I okay. Now there are two things, and I was listening to you that I wanted. And we can't go deep in both. So one
Yeah.
needs to be relatively short. I mean, first of all, sorry that you lost your dad, and especially when you had been so close to him. I lost both my parents, so I know
I'm so
how
sorry.
that feels. And although it's part of life, but
Yeah.
still, that doesn't make it. Um, yeah, miss them every day.
Yeah.
Um, and so great to hear from you. How you continue with your siblings. To continue living what they have been about and what they taught you.
Yeah.
That's just great to hear. Um, okay, I have a quick question about the work you do now.
Mhm.
Um, and then I would like to go back to something else about your job where you had to look at DEI from a global perspective. So,
Yeah.
but can we quickly go about what you're
Yeah.
doing now, and then we go
Yeah.
to that.
So what I'm doing now, there is a really dedicated foundation that really focuses on bringing more health and fairness to children and communities. And one big piece of that foundation work and that nonprofit work still requires that these folks in these communities have good jobs. And that sits with employers. And so the work that they fund is to create, they actually have a network. It was launched in 2019. And this network actually allows corporate leaders to come in and make sure that they're building an objective strategy around building more equitable workplaces, providing better quality jobs. And it also gives them, and this is something that we're transitioning into now, gives them a network of you're not alone in this. You may be one, and I learned this in my last job, you may be one of just a few in your organization doing this, but there are multitudes of other people across other companies that are doing this across different industries, and you can learn together. And if you're not even learning together, you can actually just fellowship together. There's something very powerful in hearing from others that are pitching the same ideas, trying to see if it works, especially with the way the world is changing. Even the language itself can be triggering. And so you want to figure out, am I moving in a similar, is this normal? The challenges, are they normal? I do find sometimes just kind of stepping away, and I know um, brevity is important, but I do find sometimes the challenges aren't as hard if you expected them. But when you're always reacting to surprises, that being in the defense mode can be exhausting. And so this network really helps kind of lay out the land of here's what to expect. But here's where you can get encouragement that you're on the right path. Here's where you can get tools to help maybe leverage or build your team up to do the things. But the foundation helps establish that through providing that community for folks, providing very research-based tools and frameworks, and also being a hub that connects you to other partnerships and nonprofits that a corporation may not be aware of. Some corporations have their own foundation, have their own community and social responsibility arm, but they may not be aware of what other groups in the nonprofit space are doing this work or will support this work or will support your learning to do the work. This network helps ensure they have access to all of that. It's like a hub of information that you need to be optimally, centered on getting this work done and making impact. So that's the work that I do today. And I'm loving it. I'm loving it. And I see myself in some of the audience of this network and the network members, but I'm also learning some new things of, oh, this is something that I could have tried in my last role. And I'm being connected with my last employer. I'm like, hey, let me share some information that I learned. But the network itself that this foundation sponsors is really, really powerful. And I think it can scale change at a much more accelerated pace.
Well, we'll make sure that the listeners will be able to find also the website and to get more. Yeah, and how to reach out to you maybe if they have questions. As I said, I would like to go back to the comment that you made in terms of that you work on DEI globally, and then you
Mhm.
said, because um, it depends on where you are, and the
Mhm.
contexts are so important. The words that are being used, and that's kind of really resonates. I mean,
Mhm.
as you know, I work for JLI at the moment,
Yeah.
Joint Learning Initiative on Faith and Local Communities, where we work um, with communities around the world, with NGOs, with
Oh.
universities. And if you look at especially l- what we call religious literacy and development literacy, what is important is to figure out, the terminology that's being used, the perspectives
Mhm.
that people have to really understand. And it starts with connection. And I hope that this, kind of podcast contributes to connection.
Yeah.
But a very important part is also listening and really carefully listening. And I've talked very often about putting down the ducky when you really want to listen.
Mhm.
And when we have time, I might ask you a question about it. But
Mhm.
can you give an example? Because you
Mhm.
said, um, if you would look at DEI issues around the world only from a US perspective, you will come across quite some challenges there.
Yeah.
So can you just name one example of
Yeah.
that particular realization when
Yeah.
you were doing the work or you were doing the learning?
Yeah. Yeah, it's like one example that I think a lot of folks who may be in that role face is that the leadership team that brought me back to stand up this strategy. If we're one of the first things that we need to do is a strategy that would actually have impact that people could feel was to figure out what does success look like. But if the terminology is around, let's say race, that is not a term that actually existed outside of 3 countries out of 22. That term of race, the ways that we were identifying what measurements of success would look like, it had to be reframed where the US was not centered as the definition of success or even the headline of what this work actually includes and what it looks like. And so a lot of the listening piece that you mentioned, it was so critical to make sure that one, when people would ask me, and as I stood at my team, ask our team, hey, what should we do about X? Or what do you think we should do to cover this perspective? That we stopped and we didn't talk as if we were in that seat, in that experience to give, like, oh, here's what you need to do for that group. We would make sure that there were these representatives in that country, in that identity that could say, hey, if you've got this situation, what would actually work well for you? And to make sure that we knew when we had to listen, when we had to make sure we delegated the right voices to respond of what was appropriate to feel included. And then to also just kind of know that sometimes there is no right answer today, but having the conversation and being patient to see the learning mature through people. And sometimes the people were folks who could say something offensive, but giving grace to like, okay, we got to change that, but not finger wagging. And the finger wagging of what is offensive, that is culturally sensitive, right? And so just there, like, race was one thing that, again, that's a metric that we could use that only applies to 3 countries: UK, Canada, the US. The way that it is actually tracked and measured in all the other countries, 22 total that we looked at, it's like they don't even have that to track. What are other things that we can look at? And so what we found was like a universal way to look at this is there's common questions we ask them about their ability to be promoted, their ability to achieve what they want to in their role, the ability to achieve their own career goals. That is universal. Let's figure out if we can anchor to these questions that we ask already beyond a DEI strategy. And if there's ways to maybe pluck out the identities in the aggregated data, that's how we can start to see the identities. But let's not anchor to US centered or whoever has the loudest voice at that moment based on headlines as the definition or the place where we're going to define success. Let's make sure that we know what is happening in Japan. Like for me, my team, we set up different alerts from Reuters and BBC and even like Algeria. Like we would look at these alerts to know like what legislation just passed. How does that affect people? What rule actually might activate a certain identities movement? What prosecution is happening maybe for different faiths? And so I think we honed our skills to be better learners
Mm.
and to know and have a vast enough network to know, hey, let's tap you because we need a voice from that perspective in that part of the world to tell us what would be better and to not overpromise that we can come in and save the day for everything, but to let folks know we hear you from where you sit, not from where we sit. And even if we can't do it today, we're going to log that need. We're going to log that as an optimal, maybe a pursuit, and then we're going to see if the business objectives can provide that for you. And if we can't, we're going to be honest about that too.
Great. No, thank you for that. I would like to jump now to another global, um, well, a project or goal that has been set by actually many, if not all, countries in the world. Although not everybody ratified it, signed that they would do it, and that
Hmm.
is the sustainable. Those are the Sustainable Development Goals. Uh, so facilitated by the UN, but a lot of folks were involved. It was not perfect, but it was
Hmm.
definitely already better than the Millennium Development Goals that were before the Sustainable Development Goals. I have a question to you about that. Is there one sustainable development goal that resonates with you either personally or professionally?
Um, I think when I think about the different three tracks, I know there's several different dimensions, but around like social responsibility, um, there is, and let me just make sure I'm speaking of the dimension correctly, but there's one that gets on the actual job quality that people can have. And can you remind me what that
Yeah,
dimension
so there are
is? Okay.
seven. Well, there are 17 sustainable development goals,
Right.
right? And the first goal is, for example, end poverty, and then you have end hunger.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Goal number 5 is gender equity,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
equality. 17 is, I think, partnerships.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
There is, so kind of looking at it kind of went back to my document here. I think
mhm.
they're all important. If it's okay, I'm going to
Yeah.
speak to you from the standpoint of what corporations can do
Hmm.
where I work
Yeah.
today. I think the one number 8 around decent work and economic growth,
Okay.
because I do feel like getting back to this this kind of belief I have that everyone has a skill set, but there are manufactured barriers sometimes to activate what that skill can do for a community. And when we look at like the World Economic Forum's reports, there's just so many ways that either class, kind of where you start, education, it doesn't actually change someone's capability to do something, but these barriers, these gates you have to get through can change not just that person's projection, but that community is missing out on that person's contribution if there's a lot of unnecessary barriers to activate that skill that sits within their community. And so I think that number 8, at least for corporations, is the most important to focus on, because that employer in a community is there to activate and to add to how this community kind of grows economically. But there's individuals that I think the standards actually look at is, can they get good quality work, can they have a safe work environment, and are there ways in which, if things aren't safe, they can report it, I think, anonymously. Are there ways in which you can, I think it looks at like the way that when you employ folks, do you track how folks are moving, how folks are
Hmm.
losing their job, being hired, how they're progressing. I think that is something that is a really important component of, not just the standards, but you think about how capitalistic the world has gotten. I do feel like I can't think of a solution that brings people out of poverty, that really enforces equality, that doesn't have a corporate role tied to it. Like, the corporations make such a big difference with what is enabled in a community. And yes, it starts with individuals having fairness and good job quality and safe working environments. But when you think about those individuals, they represent families, they represent households. Those households make up community, and that community makes up, um, the whole network of a nation. And so corporations have to play a major role with that, because they're giving people resources to activate mobility. They're giving people environments and new communities to really like put synergy around ideas and skills. So I think number 8 around just the overall, decent work and economic growth is
Okay.
pretty
That,
important.
that- that's great. And unfortunately, as you might know, we are behind for reaching
Oh
those
yeah.
17 sustainable development goals. And we said we would reach those before 2030. Yep, that's not going to happen if we continue like this.
Mhm.
Um, and then, some people, or actually many people, talk about at the moment about developing the need to develop new technical skills. So the inner development goals, they suggest that we also need to develop ourselves from the inside. Does that idea resonate with you?
Developing skills from the inside. I mean, it does. It just doesn't feel like a new concept, right? You always have to self-develop. You always have like at one point, it was funny in my sermon yesterday, I talked about a part of the Bible where the new technology was actually using an axe, using the iron from an axe. That was the new technology to build. And it's like there's always new technology. There's always a new thing that's been created throughout history that needs to be learned, needs to be adopted, needs to be scaled. Um, and there's always a need to develop personal, individually or from the inside. I don't know that that's a new. I think that's part of. That's always been a part of. How do you lift people out of poverty? How do you have social mobility? How do you ensure people have good quality jobs that aren't going to hurt them or make them unable to provide for their families? So I think it's important. I just don't think it's new. I don't think it's a new concept.
Yeah, I don't think that the inner development goals, the ones that develop that, claim that it is something new. I think what they say is we did not pay proper attention, or we're not paying proper attention to it, to the abilities, skills, and knowledge that you need to change those systems and processes in the
Mhm.
world. And so they came up with those 5 inner development goals, like being, thinking, relating, collaborating, and acting. And then you have these skills like empathy, critical thinking, and so yeah,
I yeah. I don't disagree with them. Like I think about on LinkedIn, there's a lot of coaching publications and research where I don't know. Like I guess when I think about the dimensions that the United Nations has right now, they're so much they're very objective, right? If you add in the interpersonal skills, um, I feel like they were. I don't know one how you measure them as cleanly. Um, they were always required though. I don't. The thing I don't know is does that make the 2030 goals or beyond more it's needed to achieve, I think, the outcome that United Nations wants. I just it feels like a very different metric, and I don't know how that can be done at scale. That's just me personally. It doesn't mean it's not valuable. I do wonder how that one will be measured with the same rigor that the other 17 dimensions are measured. Um, and especially when you look at like LinkedIn or you read any of the publications, The Economist or Harvard Business Review or India Times, like there's a million ways people tackle those that are very subjective, very, and there's a lot of people who claim to be experts on how to help you hone that are very subjective. That's, I don't have a complete point of view on those, but I feel like that's a harder one to pin down and to know when success has been met or when an organization either is working towards it or not. I think the mechanics of the other dimensions give evidence of those existing, but pinning those 5 down, and I know there's other experts who can do that. Yeah, I don't have a
okay.
fully formed point of view on that yet.
No, and what is interesting is when I ask questions to people working for faith-based organizations, they say, "Oh, this is what we do." And but I wonder if that's really
Mhm.
true. I mean, it is about,
Mhm.
as we started, you know, are you really bringing your whole self
Mhm. Mhm.
to your job and to the things that you try to do? And maybe that's not always the case,
Yeah.
or we have forgotten about it. So in that sense, I think what the inner development goals are trying to do is lift those up and make
Mhm.
them people aware again
I
that
see. I see.
things
That makes
like
sense.
critical thinking
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
empathy and forgiveness are
Mhm.
important skills that
Mhm.
you cannot say, oh, yes, I've learned that when I was 8 years old. But if you never practice,
Yeah.
then, what will happen, right? And it's a muscle. And
Yeah,
if you don't train the muscles, then you don't have your six pack anymore. That's my
I
comparison
agree.
always. So
Can I
um
add something to that?
yeah,
Is it okay for you?
yes, yes.
So I remember there was this discussion when I was in my last role leading that inclusion belonging space. I remember talking about how at my age and my faith, there's not going to be a lot that someone can tell me at work to change my beliefs and my faith. And some of the things I think are just, these are just, this is my value system. And so I said, if someone actually doesn't have some of those character components of empathy, or I was telling my team and our council that it'll be best if the mechanics of how the whole process works simply just reward that those behaviors show up. But I don't know that it can be taught, or I felt like it could, you could get into a psychological, you could get a philosophical conversation with a coworker where they just don't have it in them. That's not their value system, that's not their character. But if the processes, the mechanics of that environment only reward people who show up that
Sure.
way, it's almost like a long path to those skills that you just
Sure.
talked about, but the mechanics mean even if you don't have this in you, you don't believe that's a part of the what's needed, I can make it favorable that you simply operate that way by working the mechanics, which is what I think of the original dimensions, then having these philosophical converse. So it's important that you get them out there, but I don't know how much you can convince a person who hasn't developed that character initially. And I will say some folks that are in a certain practice or field, they may need to sharpen their sword of how they show empathy, how they are inclusive, how they are, you know, providing just spaces for people to share and to speak for themselves. There are ways and trainings and things like that that can help enforce it. But I think mechanics that simply reward one thing or even push out those that don't show those characteristics or those value systems, that over time will get you what you want. That's more of an interpersonal or interdevelopmental skill. The mechanics can do it without the, and this is maybe selfish, the exhaustion of a philosophical conversation where someone just doesn't have that same value system and they're in a corporate environment. They're like, I didn't come here to develop those. And I say that only because a lot of the work that we did in my last role, we would work on policies and practices that either mitigated the bias from the process. It's like bias isn't even going to have a role here. We're going to make it so that your bias can't influence the outcome because it is really, really objective. Or the policy or practice actually rewarded those that showed the characteristics or showed the values we wanted. So it wasn't a debate or training. It was more of you won't succeed here unless you demonstrate these really important characteristics that are a little bit more of who you are, a little bit more your value system. But the mechanics of the policy and the practice, those objective pieces should influence who gets rewarded versus who isn't going to find this satisfactory or find a long path in this space.
I would like to, as I mentioned before, what I hope this podcast is contributing to is connecting people.
Yeah.
I'm connecting you with the listeners. We are connected. Um, I'm also going to connect you with the previous guest. And the
Mhm.
previous guest has a question for you.
How does the next guest feel that this idea of us just being one single human family and that humanity is one, how do they feel that can take root in the hearts of mind of people?
I think it does. But when I hear this question, I actually think about the root word of family. And family is so that is in space of it's an exclusive space of inclusion, of such familiarity that I wonder if we can just say, maybe not, I don't know, like there's so many I think I'm struggling, Maurice, with the use of the word family, because family is special, is set aside. It is cultivated with a long thread of history behind it. I do think it has a way to get in people's heart But I think that there's just such a today, there is such a revolt against just humans as community, as just like, you don't have to be like me for me to love you and to show you respect. I kind of push back on the idea that we've got to bring people under the umbrella of something so special as family to make the acceptance palatable, if that makes sense. Like, I'm like, you don't have to be my family for me to show you utmost respect, for me to listen to what you have to say, for me to know that you might see things differently and that can still coexist with how I see things and we don't have to agree. Maybe I'm hung up on the word family because family has been such a very defined word for the way that I fellowship and love on certain people and the way I can be very vulnerable and safe in that environment of family that I don't know that we have to stick to the word family. Humanity is all one family, but humanity is all one community.
Mm.
Where in your community you can have strangers in your community, but there's also a way that you can treat them with love and respect. um, I remember, like, in my church, I've done mission work before, and we were preparing every time before you go to do mission work, you have to get training on the other religions of that space. You have to show respect for people's faith and the dominant faith in that area. But the family was the church I was maybe doing that mission work with. And that wasn't everyone. I can bring somebody in new. Once we have a conversation, we fellowship, but I don't wanna say that they have to get into this very, very, to me, very important label of family to get all those things of love, respect, empathy, and an ear to listen that just should be given to another human
Uh-huh.
in the community of the world, the global community of the world. So I do think there's a good intent behind that,
Mhm.
but that word family feels like that should be set aside. And if you apply that family label to a broader group of folks you don't know, you could get hurt. You
Mhm.
know, there's a vulnerability that I show with my family that I'm not doing for everyone.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know, but yeah,
Yeah.
I
No, no, I
mhm,
like the way you answered it. And some of the things I think we have touched upon, and especially you, is, it's important to realize that a certain word can have different meaning for somebody else. And I mean, what is important is then to name it. And then you can say, yeah, but I meant this with it.
mhm,
We
mhm,
we
mhm.
can't have that conversation now because the
Right.
the person who asked the question is not here. But
Yeah.
I think it's, yeah, I hear what you're saying. So I like your answer. Okay, then my next step is to connect you with the next guest. We
Yeah.
don't know who that is. Um, yeah, your question for the next guest.
My question for the next guest is so simple. It is something that I hear spoken very casually sometimes, but it's what's good. I just love the simplicity of that question of what's good. There is good in the day to day, there's good in the walk, there's good in the world, there's good in your circle of family or loved ones, and it could be a whole lot of things, but what's good? That's my question.
Okay, cool, like it. Um, so you have worked in a space where you've mentor, coach, a lot of mutual learning, and again, I like that. Um, because of the work that I do at the moment with JLI, we are definitely about mutual learning. And the question that I have for you is how, hmm, no, has AI changed the way you think about learning?
Yes, it has. Um, it gives more hope to me. I think that AI has democratized access to certain information and certain polish that is accepted as ready. Um, I know that it creates a lot of fear, rightfully so, but it also democratizes opportunity in a really nice way if we tap into that. One thing that I know I've looked at in prior roles is how technology can actually create equality by just taking out the human bias. Now, the AI can be taught in ways that have bias built in, but the opposite is true too. AI can actually remove the bias, and so there's information that people can get access to easier now, quicker now. There's business ventures people want to start where they can use agentic AI to now form staffs that they couldn't afford to invest in or get any funding to invest in. So I do think that AI has changed the way I think about learning, because to me it makes learning more accessible. It gives me hope about what people actually have to have and know and learn to activate a good idea and to pair that up with their skills. So there's a lot to be fearful of with AI, but for me, I think it gives another form of just hope. Um, and it has to be in the hands of the right people with the right intent. But AI can be a very hopeful tool because it can just democratize so much. There's a cost to it. There's a cost to producing that kind of intel quickly. I don't know where that's going to go, how that's going to be funded with the data centers and what the resources are that are required to run that. But for now, I'm seeing some people get activated who never had
Mm.
access to go through the door. And some of that is just learning to make better decisions, but some of that is actually activating new ideas. Give you an example, like right now, I'm trying to learn how to relearn how to sew, haven't sewn in so long. And I used AI this weekend to put together a lesson plan with my model sewing machine and videos. And my next step is I'll take a sewing class, but I'm going to try this. That's just something I need to learn.
Mhm.
And I was able to go to AI and produce a plan that gives me some discipline, gives me some resources, but also gave me a list of people to call if it's not moving forward.
Um, I mean, these conversations always go fast, Sabrina. So
They
there were
do.
many questions that I wanted to ask you, but we are running out of time. I've maybe two last questions for you. I mean, the first one is what many people consider the most difficult one. It's my music question. So if I ask you to choose a song or a piece of
Hmm.
music
Hmm.
that, for a big part, represents what you are about,
Yeah.
which song or piece of music would that be and why?
Yeah. I love this question. I don't know what the word is for a music person. I know foodie is for food, but like I'm the music
Uh-huh.
person. So I love a lot of music, a lot of different music. There's a song called Better Than Fine Waltz by Fiona Apple. And I love that song. It's a little quirky. I think that's a little bit of me. And it talks about how people expect one thing of you, but if you're the opposite, that's cool. That's good. That's fine. And I love Fiona Apple just generally, like her voice is very pretty, but the song has a lot of strings in it. And it has this whimsical kind of way it rides through the different bridges, but the words are me in a nutshell. Like that when my sister introduced me to it, she would send me these CDs, little mixtapes she would send me when I was in
Yeah,
college. And that was one of the ones she put on one of my mixtapes. And I love it. It feels like me.
cool. So we will add that song to a playlist that we
Thank you.
developed. And last question for you is, any message, invitation, or question? You talked a lot about question.
Mhm.
Would you like to share with the listeners?
Mhm. Yeah, I think the message that I would give, and it was one that I was talking to my siblings about recently, is there's a lot of reasons to be fearful and to lose hope in the world. And a lot of that I think there's no quick remedy for the issues and the pain across the world. But I do think for me, the anchor of my faith is like critical. But what it does as a Christian, but I think could be for anyone of any faith, is that it can center you with you have to just play your small part. Are you doing that? There's discussions about what they are doing or what others are doing, but in your community where you are with your loved ones, if you see hopeful stories, see that that is the truth of what people do. People do what you and your loved ones do. That is, if you feel like you've got a good group of folks around you, then define what the world is based on who is in your loved one circle, and then are you doing what you need to do in that circle, in that community? It's not for you to solve the world's major issues. There are people who are responsible for that. There is mission work where I've gone somewhere else and I've done some things, but am I taking care of my community, my neighborhood? Have I talked to my neighbor? Have I been kind to them? have I done things for my parents or my siblings? Like, it is very easy to get overwhelmed by the macro of all the issues in the world, but the message is anchor to where you're planted and do your best. That is your business to tend to. I have this saying that I do a saying every year, and the one that's really stuck with me is to mind my business. I have business to tend to. That business is my family. That business is my community. There is business other people have to attend to, but am I taking care of my business? And am I doing it in the proper way, in the way that my faith tells me to? Because I can get overwhelmed with what the macro world has to do and what the headlines say. But I have business to tend to, and I think I have everything I need to get it done. And it can keep me busy for the rest of my life. And that gives me a hope because I know I haven't done all the things. I've got plenty more work to do. So it's not like there's something where I've done all I can and now there's stuff for me to do every day in the small way that I can. If everybody tends to their business, then I think things may not all be solved, but things could be a lot better.
Great. No, thank you for sharing this message. And actually, you also answered a question that I always ask as well that we didn't address is where do you still see hope? So you've covered that.
Mhm.
That's I am really happy with that. Thank you so much for your willingness to talk with me today, for everything that you shared, for who you are. Um, Maybe my really last question is
Mhm.
any question that I should have asked you today, but I did not.
Well, I don't think Maurice, thank you so much for this opportunity. I was a little nervous. I was like, I don't know. I can ramble sometimes getting my thoughts together. I had looked at everything. So thank you just for your patience and just you are a great listener. My dad was a great listener. So I love meeting like that is a superhuman skill to listen. Thank you for that, for listening to me. The only question, I don't think there's any question you should have asked, but there was one I was interested in answering because I do have some concerns as I see my godchildren and I see children. And it was just more like, what do I think of youth and spirituality
Mhm.
today and their
Yeah.
spirituality? Um, I am concerned. Like I tend to be a very hopeful person, but I'm just like, that was one question that you had sent in advance. I was like, I don't know. That was when I thought I gotta have that answer right because I have a lot of points of view on that one,
Mhm.
but no clear answer. Um, no
So
clear.
what trends do you see then among young people?
Um, I see that young people, and that's a very general term, but the
Hmm.
young people I think in my life,
Yeah.
I see them really looking for something to anchor to. Now, for me, that was faith. That was actually wasn't even faith yet. It was just church, the activities and mechanics of church when I was that age. But I do see young people trying to find their anchor, and I think some are getting what they need to anchor on. But even the kids that are very bright, they're doing all the right things. It's almost like they're rudderless. They haven't found a substantial anchor that that is long standing. I feel like either with social media, with things that change, I don't know that the world is more secular and I don't know that they're really gravitating towards a faith. They're like, oh, I'm spiritual or I haven't picked it, but it's like I remember I was talking to one of my godchildren and they were saying they weren't sure if they were going to be a Christian, but I also know they weren't really pursuing, well, what is the faith? I had gifted them an apologetic study Bible. That's just I love the text of that one. It opens up, I think, more inclusion. But long story short, like I'm seeing the anchor in terms of the time spent on things that are not everlasting, things that are very frail or fluid. And I see them looking to anchor to something. And I don't know what role the parents have to play for that. What they have to sometimes maybe just model an activity to give that opportunity. Like, what did my parents do? Because like things were pretty anchored, even if my maturity and my faith changed quite a bit. Um, and even where my siblings have maybe picked different paths, the anchor was there. I do feel like youth today, there's just a human need to anchor to a faith, something bigger than you. And I do find there's a lot of things that can distract them and make them pick something that is not everlasting, that will not hold them in moments where they have to maybe recalibrate what they believe. And yeah, that is a concern. Like there's so much thrown at them. It's a distraction to like anchor to something that will last you for many, many decades and many, many decisions to come. I don't feel they're getting as many anchors confirmed that can carry them through to just a wiser time. I don't know. Like, I know, like, I've gotten wiser. As you get older, you just learn a few things. You get beat up a little bit, you figure out. But I don't think that the anchor has changed. There's been a couple of things where it's like, oh, that really helped me get more precise with what do I really believe. But I just find the younger kids don't have the anchor. And I do feel like some things that we see, even if they're good kids, they may not have ambition or goals. It feels rudderless, like they're just not anchored to something that is everlasting, that is long standing, that will, I don't know, just be a little, I don't know, that'll get them beyond the latest trend or what is highlighted in the news or in social media.
And can I make a quick step then? I mean, this is an observation you have about the children that you're seeing, and especially your godchildren, I think, right? That you
Hmm.
have that.
Hmm.
Do you see that in your on the work floor as well? Is the younger generation that you work with?
I do. I don't work with as many of the younger generation, but I can say the same for adults. I
Hmm.
do see where maybe there was like a like I'm a very optimistic person, but I'm very practical. I
Sure.
see where some things people held on to has disappointed or jaded them. And while they may let that thing go because it didn't deliver what they thought the hope of it would, I don't think as adults too, that's really who I work with. I don't see them, I haven't seen some pick a strong replacement. It's just like I've let go of my anchor and I just don't have an anchor anymore. And so it isn't just the young folks. It's I think it could be, and there's a lot of study that the world has gotten more secular, right? But um, yeah, and I don't know how that gets you through the harder times or gets you through. Sometimes the hard times are great lessons. Like you come out of that like brand new and really ready to tackle harder challenges. But if your foundation's kind of shaky, you could get beat up a whole lot more. Like it's literally like a ride on a boat. Like you could really get tossed around without that anchor. Um, so I don't work with as many children as I used to from more of my volunteer work, but yeah, I think maybe the folks raising the kids are. I won't say this is specifically about my godchildren, but just more of like when I
Hmm.
read, when I hear about their friends and things that
Sure.
they're going through, it's like those anchors have got to be brought back. For me, it was faith. Sometimes it was just knowing, like, even if it wasn't faith, it was like my parents, this, and that. But there's just so many distractions for adults and kids now that I don't know that everybody's certain about their anchor to get them through the journey.
Mm. Thank you so much. Really, I really enjoyed, talking with you. And as I said, all the best and keep doing what you
Thank
do.
you. Thank you so much. I really wish we had longer because I was like, what do you think, Maurice? I want to hear your thoughts.
we will we will have that conversation.
Okay.
Um, Thank you so much. Take
Thank
care.
you. You take care.
Thank you for listening to Walk, Talk, Listen. Please check us out on 100mile.org or follow us on Facebook or Instagram.